Hey guys, today we're going to do a quick summary of a very long and beloved president, John F. Kennedy. So, of course, today we've covered a bunch of presidents so far. So, consider if he's going to fall on the list as one of your favorites, even though you are getting quite a brief summary. But you might be so excited that you do your own research. And if you do, let me know. So, what I created is just a simple resume to make his life as concise as possible. So, Mr. Kennedy, I apologize deeply for not giving you more due credit. We're keeping this short today. So, first, you have his personal information. If you didn't know, the Kennedy family was a well to do family, as many of our previous presidents were, like the Roosevelts, for example. They had the summer homes and, the history of family and politics and all that kind of stuff. So, I used the term well to do family. He was also one of the first Roman Catholic presidents. I don't know if that interests any of you, but it was considered to be a pretty important fact during the time period. He had a scandalous reputation, which, to keep this eighth grade appropriate, we'll just say it had a lot to do with the ladies. And one reputable rumor, and I use the word rumor because I, of course, cannot confirm this, but one woman he was apparently scandalous with was none other than Marilyn Monroe. And a lot of people actually don't know this, but JFK actually suffered from chronic back pain. He actually saw a doctor repeatedly throughout the day. He received numerous treatments on a daily basis. He got shots almost every single day. And this actually had to do with his background as being in the Navy in World War II, an injury he received at that time. So he, of course, had a history in politics, although he was a very young president and was considered to not have too much personal experience in politics simply because of his age. But again, because of his family's history in politics, I guess people kind of combine the two together. This is an interesting kind of pop culture detail. He was part of the first televised debate. Now, for us, of course, we're totally used to this, so it's not a big deal. But during the time period, it was a big deal because it was the first time, dare I say, appearance mattered. And of course, they didn't even know to think about this. But a lot of people actually say that when JFK went up against Nixon during this televised debate, that one of the reasons Nixon lost is just because he wasn't attractive. And, if you watch somebody talking, he just wasn't engaging to the public. Like, he wasn't, we'll just say it, he wasn't pleasant to look at, which is why you guys, unfortunately, don't get to look at me anymore, which is probably diminishing our lessons, because my flailing hand gestures all the time probably keep you more engaged. Anyway, moving on. Awkward. Some of his accomplishments and things that he was really pushing for during his presidency. He was a big part of the space race, so hopefully when you watch the research presentations, you'll get to see a little bit of that. My garbage truck is going by right now, so I hope you guys aren't hearing that. But anyway, if you are, I'll talk a little bit louder. He was also big at pushing for civil rights and continuing that movement that we've already discussed. And of course, I know all of you listening today already know that he was the fourth president in our history that got assassinated. And his, for whatever reason, was a huge deal. I personally was not alive for this, but this was one of those moments in history that if you ask people of that generation, so if you have people in that generation in your life, ask them, where were you when Kennedy was shot? And similar to my experience, let's say, with 9/11, I can tell you the exact moment, the time, what I was wearing, where I was sitting, all of that kind of stuff. It was just one of those really monumental moments in history. And it impacted a lot of people emotionally. Like, people were actually crying, even though they've never met the president, they were crying and really upset over this. As far as his foreign policy, a lot of this has to do with the Cold War. So unfortunately, he had to play a role in that because it was a pretty tense period in time. So the two I'm going to mention was, well, the Berlin Wall went up. So he didn't really have much to do with that other than like it kind of happened. But these two, which go together, the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Bay of Pigs, this had to do with during his presidency, Cuba, which you might remember from our own, recent history, had gone communist. And they had this new leader, Fidel Castro, that a lot of people in the United States were not a fan of because we didn't like communism and we didn't like the way he was abusing his people financially, emotionally, taking away their rights, and so on and so forth. So there was a big to-do between us and Cuba during the time, especially since Cuba is about 90 miles from our mainland in Florida. So there's a lot of tension there. He was part of this kind of military endeavor called the Bay of Pigs, where we tried to take some of the revolutionists in Cuba and get them to try to take down the government, but it completely backfired and a lot of people died. There's also this incident, which is huge in history, called the Cuban Missile Crisis, in which Russia, of course, trying to support communism, they were sending missiles over to Cuba, and we sent our ships to kind of blockade it to make sure that those missiles couldn't get to Cuba. Long story short, this was like about a 24 time period in world history in which people kind of sat around holding their breath because any second a war of mass destructive weapons could have taken place, because there were literally nuclear weapons kind of pointing at each other very close off the coast of the United States, and you can imagine the fear was huge. Again, I wasn't alive at the time, but you can definitely read about it and hear those personal stories of people who were worried that they weren't going to see another day. Literally, that's how tense that moment in history was. And then Vietnam, which we will talk about next week. All right, so with that, I kind of just threw this up here. Some people have a fascination with JFK. So I just included this link, which is a cool, very brief timeline that goes through some of the significant moments in his not only presidency, but his entire life. So if you want to go there, feel free to clickety-click on that. Now, of course, the assassination plays a big role in his legacy. So similar to John Wilkes Booth, the famous assassin 3 name was Lee Harvey Oswald. And this is him. This is actually after his arrest, which doesn't last long. And well, I guess I'll just say it right now. So after the assassination, they arrest Lee Harvey Oswald within the day. And unfortunately, what added to the controversy of the assassination and why you probably still hear conspiracies about it is before he went to court, before they got to really even speak to him, he ends up being assassinated by somebody who supported JFK and, was a big fan, so to speak. And so that added to the controversy. Like, was he really involved? Why did they kill him? Did they kill him to shut him up because he knew something? And you can go on and on with the list of conspiracies that go along with it. I personally stick with the cut and dry one that you see in most common news feed about the assassination, but you can dive into a whole rabbit hole about this, so feel free to do so. Some people don't realize Lee Harvey Oswald, he didn't necessarily have a vendetta against JFK personally. He just didn't believe in democracy. Lee Harvey Oswald was, in fact, a communist. He supported Cuba, and a huge part of his life was about, he went to Russia and wanted to learn about communism in Russia. He came back here and then he started to support Cuba, and he really wanted, he supported Fidel Castro and so on and so forth. So it wasn't necessarily against JFK so much as just our government, our democracy to begin with. So he actually attempted to assassinate this man here, and he thought he was successful. And so, JFK wasn't his first assassination. So, of course, the famous day of the assassination, JFK was running for another election to be reelected again as president. So he went to Texas and sat in one of these little motorcades, where he's waving at the people. And unfortunately, that's where the assassination takes place. Lee Harvey Oswald actually worked in this building. And so that's one of the reasons why he wasn't necessarily arrested right away, because he actually passed right by police, but was a worker in the building. So that made a difference, obviously. So this is apparently where he was, and shot down at the motorcade. Other people were injured. There's conspiracies about the bullets and whether it hit him in the front and the back, and people try to dive in to find other stories. Again, I kind of stick to the cut and dry of what actually happened, but feel free to do your own research. After this, Lee Harvey Oswald kind of evades the police. He ends up, unfortunately, killing a police officer who, just pulled over to ask him a couple of questions. Because of course the radios were all spewing, president assassinated, this is the man we're looking for, so on. And so he ducks into a movie theater, Lee Harvey Oswald, and that is where he is arrested. And so the very last thing, unfortunately, before the end of that day, President Kennedy does in fact die in a nearby hospital. And so they take his wife, who's also extremely famous, and they inaugurate Johnson as president. And this is a famous image because he is the only president to be inaugurated on an airplane. So while they were flying back to Washington, they actually inaugurated him. So that is the story of JFK in a quick little nutshell. I hope I'm under 10 minutes. That was what I was aiming for you guys today, because the weather's getting nice. I don't know if it is at the moment because this is pre-recorded, obviously. But having said that, you have a quick little cause and effect thing that doesn't just talk about JFK. It kind of summarizes a lot of the stuff that we've talked about already. And there's a couple of things in that worksheet that we didn't mention because, again, I'm trying to wrap up the year and just introduce you to a lot of stuff before you leave me and head off to whatever high school you have chosen. So with that, guys, I'm going to sign off. And I will, I'm looking for my end button. I will talk to you guys later, hopefully. See ya. Bye-bye.